Our gospel story opens with Jesus heading into the synagogue in his hometown. And this happens right after the healing of the little girl of the synagogue leader. And it's here where he begins preaching and teaching, just like Jesus has been doing everywhere else that he has been. However, things don't go according to plan. Unlike the last time where Jesus taught in the synagogue when he was in Capernaum back in chapter 1, people were not amazed by his teachings. Rather, they began to ask questions, and not about his teaching or his parables or the healings that he was doing, but rather these questions were about who Jesus was and who Jesus' family is. They asked about his mother, and the crowd asked about his brothers and sisters. But they don't ask about Jesus' father. In Mark, they leave out Jesus' paternal heritage. And this is distinct to this gospel. It is intentional. Now, it's not a secret that in the ancient world, paternal lineage was incredibly important. Who your father was not only showed your class or rank in society, but it is how wealth, land, and even your trade, your job, your livelihood, how all of this was passed down. When there was not a father or paternal lineage to be followed, it would be considered scandalous, even shameful, in a society driven by this kind of honor. And so by the crowd questioning Jesus' family and leaving out his paternal heritage, this is meant to show how scandalous Jesus' ministry is. It's like they're asking, why should we listen to a man who has such a sketchy family life? We know his mom and where he comes from. We know that we're not entirely sure who his dad is, so why should we believe him? And even Jesus is taken aback and amazed by their unbelief and the questions that they're asking. This was not something Jesus expected. And yet, even Jesus' response is one of amazement. Rather than answering the questions the crowd is asking about his family, Jesus leans on ancient tradition. And verse 4, Jesus compares himself to prophets. Our Bible says prophets are not without honor except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house. Now, prophets are a long-standing tradition, and while they are often at odds with their towns, communities, and even religious institutions, the role of a prophet is one that was considered extremely honorable. However, here is the thing about communities that operate on an honor and shame system, much like this one in the Gospel according to Mark. According to scholars, honor is a limited good. So if someone in this community were to gain honor, that means someone else has to lose honor. In the words of scholar Dr. Bruce J. Malena, to be recognized as a prophet in one's own town meant that the honor due to other persons and other families were diminished. Claims to more than one's appointed, or at birth, share of honor thus threatened others and would eventually trigger attempts to cut the claimant down to size. So by Jesus aligning himself with the honor that prophets received, he was calling into question the honor and worthiness of his neighbors and those in his community, based on how the community viewed honor and shame. This honor and shame dynamic was the undercurrent as the scene in the synagogue plays out. Our gospel story today reminds me of a children's book by Max Lucado, and it's called You Are Special. This book is a story about a community of wooden dolls called Wemmicks, created by a carpenter. The dolls all had their own honor and shame system. If you did something well, you got a star. But if you messed up and made a mistake, you got a sticker that was a dot. And honestly, as you read the book, you realize most people got stars because they started out with stars, and most people got dots because they already had dots. The people with the stars all hung out together and threw big parties, while the people with dots were cast to the side, only allowed to watch. And then one day, one wooden wimmick with lots of dots named Punchinello noticed a doll with no dots and no stars named Lucia. When Punchinello asked Lucia about the lack of her stars or dots, she told Punchinello that he needed to go visit the carpenter. So that's what Punchinello did. He began to visit the carpenter every day, and each time they were together, the carpenter began sharing that how the world was bigger than the stars and the dots and the stickers. And as Punchinello listened, he noticed that his stars and his dots began to fall off one by one, until there were none. It was as if Punchinello began to realize that this binary of worthy and unworthy, of honor and shame, no longer worked for him. That this mindset, this scarcity mindset of a limited good, held him back. And so as he leaned into new visions of what could be, he experienced something new, and it changed him. It changed him so deeply that the stickers and dots could no longer stick to him. He was no longer bound to the way of thinking that he had been brought up in. It was as if there was a force more powerful than the adhesive on those stickers, beckoning Punchinello forward. And so here is where I want to turn back to our text. As we close out this synagogue story, as we read in Mark 6:5, that Jesus could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. At first glance, it can be startling to read that Jesus could do no deeds of power there. The first half of this verse leads us to believe that because of what is happening here, Jesus' abilities are somewhat limited. However, the second clause offers an exception, except that Jesus laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. Even the crowd's offense and disbelief could not hold back God's ability to heal and seek wholeness. One of the threads of Mark is the constant inbreaking love of God and the power and justice God brings into this world. Just like when the heavens split open at Jesus' baptism, and when Jesus healed that little girl and that woman who was hemorrhaging just a chapter ago. Nothing can stop God from moving into this world. Not even deeply ingrained systems of binary thinking, like this one here, like honor and shame, nor even our own disbelief. One of the things I love most about Mark is this idea that while faith is critical, it is not necessary. God is not limited by our faith. God is bigger than what we believe or what we don't. And Mark shows us again and again that God's Spirit will be on the move no matter how often we or the church or communities or world or Americans can try to stifle it. God's freedom is not bound to our belief or our unbelief. Rather, it is because of who God is that we are invited to see the world in this new way, to experience the kind of freedom and liberation that God is offering. As God asks us to sit at God's feet and learn and lean into what could be and what will be, the world that God has created and that God continues to create, as God invites us along to be part of this story and song. And this is so much like what Jesus did when he taught, healed, and loved, even in the synagogue in his hometown. Friends, this week as each of us walk the path in front of us, I invite you to imagine what could be. Let yourself wander into the divine imagination of what the world could look like if we allowed ourselves to sit more fully in the freedom of God, to move from the scarcity of our fear into the brilliance and fullness of God. How different would this world look? And then let yourself wander into where have you caught glimpses of this kind of world, and where do you see God at work? And let yourself linger there. Let yourself imagine. Let yourself soak it in so that maybe the adhesive of what was might begin to unstick from our own minds and our own hearts. And as you let yourself sit with this idea, this image, and hold it, and as you do, may you be reminded that even if you cannot hang on to this beautiful design, that cannot stop God from moving and working to establish a world more beautiful than the one we could ever dream of. Because God is surely coming. God is surely here. God's freedom, love, and liberation and justice is on the move. This is good news, friends. Thanks be to God.